The last time I saw my wife, Ellen, she was smiling. It was a cold morning in January of 2024, the kind where the sky is a flat, uniform gray, and the air is so still, you can almost hear the snowflakes landing. She was standing in the kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, looking out the window at the snow that had been falling steadily since dawn. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, her voice warm and soft. I agreed. We stood there for a moment, just watching the world turn white. A quiet, perfect moment of domestic peace that I never would have thought would be our last. A little while later, she pulled on her boots and her heavy winter coat. "I'm just going to grab the mail before it gets buried," she said. I remember telling her to be careful, to watch her step on the walkway. She just laughed that easy laugh of hers and said, "I'm not made of glass, dear." She stepped out the front door and into a world from which she would never return. The police report, when I could finally bring myself to read it, called her death and accident. A tragic slip and fall on an icy patch of concrete, resulting in a fatal head injury. But it wasn't an accident. An accident is something unpredictable, something that couldn't be foreseen or prevented. This was different. This was an inevitability, a tragedy that had been written in advance by years of complaints and a pattern of deliberate neglect. For years, our Homeowners Association, the very organization we paid to maintain the safety of our community, had treated our well-being as an acceptable corner to cut. They saw salting the sidewalks and plowing the common areas not as a fundamental duty, but as an optional expense to be minimized. For the past year, in the crushing, hollow silence of a house that was once filled with her laughter, I have been on a quest for answers, a quest that has led me through a mountain of ignored emails, dismissive board meeting minutes, and the cold, hard reality of a system that values saving a few dollars over saving a human life. That quest has now culminated in a lawsuit filed this year in 2025 against the HOA. They think this is about money. It's not. No amount of money could ever fill the profound emptiness I feel every single morning when I wake up and reach for a hand that isn't there. This is the story of how a simple, preventable tragedy exposed a pattern of deadly negligence. It's the story of a year-long fight to hold a powerful organization accountable for the life they treated as collateral damage in their budget meetings. They want to call what happened to my Ellen an accident, a freak occurrence, an act of God. I'm here to prove it was a choice, their choice. But before I can tell you about their choice, I need to tell you about the life they chose to devalue. Our life, my life with Ellen. For 42 years, she was the sun around which my world orbited. When people talk about a lost loved one, they often speak in grand, poetic terms. But what you really miss are the small things, the tiny, everyday moments that weave the fabric of a shared existence. I miss the sound of her humming to herself in the garden. I miss the smell of the sourdough starter she kept on the kitchen counter. I miss the way she would instinctively reach for my hand whenever we were watching a movie. Ellen wasn't just a victim in a news story. She was the vibrant, beating heart of our family in our quiet little street, Sparrow Lane. She was the one who organized the annual block party, the one who knew every neighbor's name, the one who would leave a pot of her famous chicken soup on the doorstep of anyone who was sick. Her garden was a chaotic masterpiece of color and life, a place where she would spend hours, her hands covered in dirt, a look of pure contentment on her face. Our home wasn't just a house. It was a testament to her warmth. The walls are covered in photos of our children and now our grandchildren. There's a worn patch on the left cushion of the sofa, her spot. The whole place still carries the faint, comforting scent of the lavender she grew by the back door. We had built a simple, comfortable life. We'd raised our kids, celebrated our triumphs, and weathered our storms together within those four walls. Our retirement was meant to be our reward. A quiet time for morning coffees on the porch, for long walks in the autumn, for simply enjoying the comfortable silence that comes from knowing another person so completely that you don't always need words. We lived a life built on care and attention to the little details that matter. We had no idea we were living under the governance of an organization that practiced the exact opposite. Our Homeowners Association was, for the most part, a background annoyance. They were a faceless entity that would send out poorly formatted newsletters once a quarter, filled with passive-aggressive reminders about bringing in your trash cans or the proper height for a hedge. The board was made up of a rotating cast of neighbors, well-meaning people, I thought, who were more concerned with keeping our monthly dues low than with much else. We saw them at the grocery store. We'd give them a polite wave. They weren't monsters. They were just indifferent. Their approach to maintenance was always reactive, never proactive. They'd fix something only after it broke. They'd address a problem only after it became a complaint. We all kind of accepted it as the cost of living in a managed community. You put up with the inefficiency because nothing truly terrible had ever happened. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Before we go any further, I'd like you to think about your own community, whether it's an apartment building or an HOA. Do you trust the people in charge to make the right choice when it really matters? To prioritize your safety over saving a few dollars on the budget? Let me know what you think in the comments. It's a question I never thought to ask myself until it was far, far too late. We paid our dues on time, every time. We believed we were paying for a service, for the peace of mind that comes with knowing the common areas, the sidewalks, the shared spaces we all used were being properly cared for. We were paying for safety. We were paying for diligence. It turns out all we were paying for was a false sense of security. The board's indifference wasn't just poor management, it was a quiet, ticking time bomb. And in the winter of 2024, that bomb was about to go off. Right on my own front walkway. The life Ellen and I had so carefully built was about to be shattered by their decision to do nothing. And that decision to do nothing wasn't a one-time event. It was a philosophy, a pattern of neglect that had been getting worse for years, a slow erosion of care that you don't really notice until it's a landslide. In hindsight, the warning signs were all there, like little red flags planted in the snow of winters past. The first time I remember feeling a genuine flicker of concern was probably 3 years before Ellen's fall. We had a small ice storm, nothing major, but the communal walkway that led to the bank of mailboxes became a treacherous sheet of ice. I saw one of our older neighbors, Mr. Henderson, slip and fall. Thankfully, he was unhurt, just shaken up. That evening, I sent a polite email to the HOA's management company. Just a heads up, I wrote. The main walkway is a solid sheet of ice and quite dangerous. It would be great if we could get some salt down before someone gets seriously hurt. The response was a generic, automated-sounding reply. Thank you for your feedback. We have forwarded your concern to the maintenance committee. Nothing happened. The ice eventually melted a few days later, and like everyone else, I just forgot about it. But the problem kept recurring. I started to notice that the issue was a specific, recurring hazard. There was a low spot in the walkway, right near the curve, where water from a faulty drain pipe on the nearby clubhouse would pool. In the winter, it was the first place to freeze and the last place to thaw. It was a permanent booby trap. Ellen, ever the pragmatist, even brought it up at one of the sparsely attended annual HOA meetings. She stood up and politely mentioned the drainage issue, suggesting a simple regrading or a gutter extension could fix it permanently. The board president, a man more concerned with the budget than with anything else, nodded thoughtfully and said, "We'll get a quote and look into it." It was the polite, neighborly way of saying no. The winter before the tragedy, in 2023, my vague annoyance curdled into genuine fear. We had another freezing rain, and that same spot by the mailboxes was a mirror of black ice. Ellen had gone out to drop a letter in the box, and I was watching from the window. I saw her foot go out from under her. She flailed, her arms pinwheeling, and just managed to grab onto the metal handrail of the mailbox kiosk at the last second, saving herself from a nasty fall. My heart leaped into my throat. She came back inside, her face pale, and laughed it off, but I was furious. This wasn't a fluke anymore. This was a known, documented, and consistently ignored hazard. That night, I wrote a different kind of email. I was done being polite, I was formal, I was direct, and I was creating a paper trail. I detailed the history of the problem, I mentioned Mr. Henderson's fall, and I described Ellen's near miss that very afternoon. I ended the email with a clear, unambiguous warning. This issue has now been raised multiple times over several years. It is no longer a minor inconvenience, it is a serious and persistent safety hazard. If a resident is seriously injured due to the board's continued inaction on this matter, the HOA will be held liable for its negligence. I hit send, feeling a grim satisfaction there. Now it was on the record. The response, which came a week later, was a masterpiece of corporate deflection. It was a formal letter from the board, acknowledging my concerns and assuring me that they take resident safety very seriously. It mentioned that they were exploring cost-effective solutions, but that major landscaping projects require a significant budgetary allocation that must be approved by the board. It was a polite, legally vetted way of telling me once again that they were not going to do anything. And that brings me to the week of the storm in January of 2024. The weather reports were all over the news, predicting the biggest snow and ice storm in years. A sense of dread settled over me. I knew what was coming. I knew that low spot on the walkway was going to be a death trap. I decided to send one last email. This time, it wasn't a demand or a threat. It was a plea. I wrote it to the entire board. "I am writing to you one last time," I said, "to implore you to take the upcoming storm seriously. The long-standing drainage issue at the main walkway remains unaddressed. At the absolute very least, please, I am begging you, ensure that the maintenance crews are scheduled to heavily salt and sand all common walkways before the freezing rain is forecast to begin tomorrow morning." I received a single curt reply from the board president a few hours later. "Our winter maintenance protocols are in place. Thank you for your concern." The next morning, the snow began to fall. I looked out the window at that walkway, and I could already see a sheen of ice forming in that familiar low-lying spot. The salt barrels at the edge of the common area were still full, untouched. The maintenance protocols were not in place. I had done everything I could think of to warn them. I had been polite, I had been formal, I had pleaded. The ticking bomb I had been hearing for years was now just hours away from detonating. And all I could do was watch and pray that no one got hurt. But my prayers went unanswered. And the person who got hurt was the one person in the world I couldn't bear to lose. The day of the storm was, at first, beautiful. The world outside our windows was transformed into a pristine, silent landscape of white. The snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, muffling all sound and creating a sense of cozy isolation. Ellen and I spent the morning in our pajamas, drinking coffee, reading the newspaper, and watching the snow pile up on the branches of the old oak tree in our yard. It felt safe. It felt peaceful. It was just another snow day in a lifetime of snow days we had shared together. Around 11 o'clock, we saw the mail truck make its slow, careful way down our street. Ellen, ever the pragmatist, got up from her armchair. "Well, I'd better go grab that now before it gets buried under another foot of snow," she said, pulling on her heavy winter boots and her favorite red coat. I remember looking up from my book as she zipped it up. "Be careful out there," I said, the same casual warning I'd given her 1,000 times. "That walkway is probably a mess." She just gave me that warm, easy smile of hers, the one that always made the little crinkles around her eyes appear. "I'm not made of glass, dear," she said. And with a final cheerful wave, she stepped out the front door into the swirling snow. I went back to my book. The quiet of the house punctuated only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the faint whisper of the wind outside. A few minutes passed, then 5, then 10. It was the silence that got to me first. The front door should have opened again. I should have heard the sound of her stomping the snow off her boots, the crinkle of the mail being dropped on the entryway table. But there was nothing. A small, cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. "Ellen?" I called out. No answer. I got up and went to the front window, peering out into the thick snowfall. I couldn't see her. The knot in my stomach tightened into a fist of pure fear. I threw on my own coat, not even bothering with my boots, and pulled open the front door. The icy air hit my face like a slap. My eyes scanned the front yard, the street, the neighbor's driveway. Nothing. Then I looked down. The scene is burned into my memory with a horrific clarity. The mail was scattered across the snow-dusted walkway, a few white envelopes stark against the white, and just beyond them, at the bottom of our 3 small porch steps, was a flash of red. It was her coat. She was lying on her side, her head at an unnatural angle, her body terrifyingly still. Time seemed to warp, to stretch and compress. The world went silent, then rushed back in a roar. I don't remember running down the steps. I just remember kneeling beside her, my bare hands sinking into the freezing snow. "Ellen?" I choked out, my voice a strangled foreign sound. I touched her face. It was so cold. I saw the dark, slick patch of black ice peeking out from under the fresh layer of snow, right in that familiar low-lying spot I had warned them about again and again and again. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely get my phone out of my pocket. I fumbled with the screen, my fingers numb and clumsy. I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice on the other end was calm, procedural, a voice from another universe. "What is your emergency?" My own voice was a ragged sob. "My wife. She fell. She's on the ice. She's not moving." The questions came one after another. "Is she breathing? What's your address?" I answered them mechanically, my mind a fog of pure primal panic. The sirens were a distant wail that grew into a deafening scream. The paramedics arrived, their movements urgent and professional. They pushed me back gently but firmly, their voices a low murmur of medical terms I didn't understand. I stood there, a helpless spectator as they worked on the love of my life on a frozen walkway, the snow continuing to fall around us, covering the scattered mail like a shroud. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and the rhythmic beep of a machine I didn't want to understand. I sat in the waiting room, which smelled of antiseptic and despair, for what felt like a lifetime. The clock on the wall ticked with an agonizing slowness. Finally, a doctor with tired, kind eyes came out and asked to speak with me in a private room. I knew before he said a single word, from the look on his face. The words he spoke were gentle, clinical, and utterly devastating. Severe trauma to the back of the head, the fall, the ice. We did everything we could. I'm so very sorry. In that moment, the world didn't just stop. It ended. The life I had known for 42 years was gone. The future we had planned, the quiet retirement, the grandchildren we were supposed to watch grow up, it all vanished in the space of a single careless slip on a patch of ice that should not have been there. The ticking bomb had finally detonated, and the explosion had taken everything. And in the aftermath of an explosion, there's only silence. A deep, profound, suffocating silence that filled every corner of our home. In the days and weeks that followed Ellen's death, I walked through the rooms of our life like a ghost. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. Her half-finished cup of coffee was still in the sink. The entire house was a museum of a life that had been abruptly, violently stopped. Friends and family came and went, their voices a low, comforting murmur of condolences, but their words couldn't penetrate the thick fog of grief that had enveloped me. I was just going through the motions of living in a world that had suddenly lost all its color. About a week after the funeral, a small sympathy card arrived in the mail. It had the HOA's logo on it. Inside was a generic, pre-printed message expressing deepest sympathies for the unfortunate accident. The word accident felt like a physical blow, a calculated, legally vetted insult. They were already building their wall of denial, framing my wife's death as a random, unavoidable tragedy. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the conditions that had caused it. It was a cold, corporate gesture designed to absolve them of any responsibility. And it was the first small spark that managed to penetrate my grief. That spark smoldered for months. I was adrift, lost in the emptiness. One long, sleepless night, I found myself in my home office, aimlessly going through old files. I don't even know what I was looking for. Maybe just a piece of Ellen, a receipt with her handwriting on it, anything. Instead, I found the folder where I'd kept my correspondence with the HOA. I opened it, and there it was, all laid out in chronological order. My polite email from 3 years ago, my formal warning after Ellen's near miss, and my final desperate plea sent just days before she died. Reading them again one after another felt like watching a slow-motion car crash that I'd tried and failed to prevent. It wasn't just a memory of a vague concern anymore. It was a documented, irrefutable paper trail of their negligence. The shift happened slowly. A neighbor, Mr. Henderson, the same man I'd seen fall years ago, came by to check on me. He sat at my kitchen table, his hat in his hands, and quietly told me he'd called the management company twice that winter about the same icy patch. Another neighbor from down the street sent me an email, a copy of a complaint she had filed the previous year about the same faulty drain pipe. Story after story, they confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just my fight. Ellen wasn't their only near miss. She was just the one who hadn't been lucky enough to catch herself in time. My grief didn't go away, but it was joined by a new, cold, and clear-eyed anger. This wasn't an act of God. This was a man-made tragedy. It was a death by 1,000 budget cuts, a fatality caused by a culture of indifference. The board hadn't just been incompetent, they had been warned, repeatedly and in writing, about a specific, known hazard, and they had actively chosen to do nothing. Their inaction wasn't just poor management, it was a form of violence. The decision to sue was the hardest I have ever made. I am not a litigious person. The thought of a public, drawn-out legal battle was exhausting. But then I would think of Ellen's easy laugh, and I would think of that cold, dismissive email from the board president, and I knew I couldn't let it go. If I did nothing, her death would be officially recorded as just an unfortunate accident. The board would continue its negligent ways, and it was only a matter of time before another family on Sparrow Lane had their world shattered. So in the spring of 2025, nearly a year after I lost her, I finally made the call. I found a lawyer who specialized in premises liability. I walked into his office not as a grieving, broken man, but as a plaintiff carrying a thick folder of evidence. I laid out the emails, the photos, the timeline, and the stories from my neighbors. He listened, his expression growing more and more grim with every page I showed him. When I was finished, he looked at me and said, "This is one of the clearest cases of gross negligence I've ever seen." Filing the lawsuit wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a somber, heavy act. It felt like a final admission that the life I had known was truly over, and that this new life, a life of depositions and legal filings, had begun. My personal grief had been transformed into a public fight for accountability. It was no longer just for me, it was for her. And the fight for her took us into a place I never thought I'd see. The inside of a courtroom, where we would finally have the one thing the HOA had never given us: a chance to be heard. The trial began in the fall of 2025. Walking into that courtroom every day was an exercise in quiet determination. I would sit in the front row, my children on either side of me, and watch the jury file in, their faces a collection of strangers who held the meaning of my wife's death in their hands. Across the room sat the HOA board members, including the president who had sent that final dismissive email. They no longer looked like powerful figures. They looked small and uncomfortable in their stiff suits, out of their element, avoiding my gaze at all costs. Their lawyer's strategy was exactly what we expected. He tried to paint Ellen's death as a tragic but unavoidable act of God. He spoke of the unprecedented severity of the storm and argued that the HOA had followed its standard winter maintenance protocols. In his opening statement, he even had the audacity to suggest that Ellen was partially at fault for choosing to go outside in such weather. He was trying to frame this as a story about a freak accident, a story with no villain, a story where no one was to blame. My lawyer, a kind but fiercely intelligent man named Mr. Davies, was there to tell the jury the real story. And he told it with a mountain of their own negligence. The trial was a slow, methodical dismantling of their entire defense. Mr. Davies began with the paper trail. He projected my years of emails onto a large screen for the entire court to see. He read them aloud, his voice calm and steady, starting with the polite "heads up" about Mr. Henderson's fall, moving to the more formal warning after Ellen's near miss, and ending with my final desperate plea sent the day before she died. He would read one of my detailed warnings, and then he would project the HOA's cold, dismissive response. "Thank you for your feedback. We are exploring cost-effective solutions. Our winter maintenance protocols are in place." The pattern was undeniable. It was a story of a resident practically begging his leadership to prevent a disaster, and a leadership that simply did not care. Then came the expert witnesses. Mr. Davies called a civil engineer who had surveyed our community's common areas. He testified under oath that the drainage from the clubhouse roof was improperly designed, leading directly to the pooling of water in that specific low spot on the walkway. He called it a textbook example of a foreseeable hazard. He called a property management safety consultant who testified that the HOA's winter maintenance protocols were woefully inadequate, falling far below the industry standard of care. He explained that for a storm of that predicted severity, a proactive salting and sanding of all walkways should have been mandatory, not optional. The most powerful moment, however, was when the board president himself was called to the stand. Mr. Davies put my final email up on the screen. "You received this email, did you not?" he asked. The president, a man who had always seemed so confident at our annual meetings, squirmed in his seat. "Yes," he admitted. "And in it," Mr. Davies continued, "my client implored you to at least salt the walkways before the storm hit. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And what was your response?" The president cleared his throat. "I told him our protocols were in place." "But they weren't, were they?" Mr. Davies pressed. "The maintenance logs we subpoenaed show that no salt or sand was ordered for your community until noon on the day of the storm, hours after my client's wife had already fallen. You had a specific warning about a specific danger and you did nothing. Can you tell the jury why?" The president stammered. He talked about the budget, he talked about the maintenance company's schedule, he talked about not wanting to overreact. But every excuse sounded hollow, a pathetic attempt to justify a fatal cost-saving measure. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man who had made a choice to value a few $100s in maintenance fees over the safety of the people he was supposed to protect. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't talk about the bylaws or the budget. Mr. Davies simply asked me to tell the jury about Ellen. I talked about her garden, about her laugh, about the way she would hum when she was baking. I told them about our last morning together, about the coffee, about her smile. I told them what it felt like to find her lying in the snow. I wasn't speaking to the HOA's lawyer or even to the judge. I was speaking to the 12 strangers in the jury box, trying to make them understand that this wasn't about an asset or a property. This was about a person, a life, the love of my life. The wait for the verdict was the longest hour of my life. We sat in that silent courtroom, the weight of the past year pressing down on us. Finally, the jury filed back in, their faces solemn and unreadable. The foreman handed a piece of paper to the clerk. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The clerk read the verdict, her voice clear and steady. On the question of negligence resulting in a wrongful death, we, the jury, find the defendant, the Sparrow Lane Homeowners Association, liable. Liable. The word hung in the air, a single perfect note of validation. I felt my daughter's hand squeeze mine. I looked over at my son and saw tears streaming down his face. A wave of profound, soul-deep relief washed over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was just justice. A quiet, somber, and hard-won justice. The board members across the room looked pale, stunned. They had built a wall of denial for over a year, and the truth had just brought it crashing down. They could no longer call it an accident. The jury had called it what it was, their fault. And hearing them say it, hearing the truth declared in that courtroom, was a moment of profound validation. But it wasn't a moment of closure. There's no such thing. We didn't go out to celebrate the verdict. We just went home back to the same quiet house, where her armchair still sat empty by the window. The jury awarded a substantial monetary sum for wrongful death, but the number was just an abstraction, a legal calculation for a loss that is incalculable. There is no price for a life. There is no check big enough to fill the space that Ellen left behind. The real victory, the only one that truly matters, came quietly in the months that followed. The lawsuit sent a shockwave through our community. The old board president and the other members resigned in disgrace. A new board was elected, made up of younger, more engaged residents who were horrified by what had happened. They didn't just promise to do better. They took immediate and decisive action. They hired a new, professional property management company with a sterling reputation for safety. They finally fixed the faulty drain pipe by the clubhouse, regrading the entire area so water would flow away from the path. And this past winter, for the first time in as long as I can remember, I saw the maintenance crews out on the walkways, spreading salt and sand before the first snowflake even fell. Every time I see a child run safely down that path to the mailbox, or watch one of my elderly neighbors walk with confidence on a cold day, I feel a small, bittersweet ache in my chest. This is her legacy. This is the change that her loss created. I found a new, quiet purpose in the wake of it all. I attend every HOA meeting now. I'm the old man in the back of the room who reads every line of the budget and asks the hard questions about safety protocols. I do it for her. This fight was never about revenge for me. It was about honoring the woman I loved, a woman who cared for everyone by ensuring that the community she was a part of would finally start caring for its residents. The lawsuit is over, but my work isn't. Her death cannot be an accident. It has to be a lesson. And I will spend the rest of my days making sure it is a lesson that is never, ever forgotten. This is my story, but it's a story for all of us. Whether you live in an apartment, a townhome, or a community with an HOA, your voice matters. Don't wait for tragedy to become a lesson. If you believe your community is neglecting its duty to protect you, speak up. Get involved. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments below. What's one small thing you've seen that could become a big problem if left unaddressed?